of the signs in former city council person Meg Tuthill's yard, 2 of 3 were soundly defeated within the wedge itself. And
I love this segment. Hold on, Jason. Before you go too hard, I'm going to play the CNN breaking news music, and we're going to have results from Meg Tuthill's yard. Okay? Okay, I'm getting word that we have more results, this time from Meg Tuthill's yard. We're going to correspondent Jason Garcia. Jason, do we have results from the candidates who appeared in Meg Tuthill's yard?
Yes, John, it's been a shocking turn of events here in the wedge.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Okay, welcome back to the Wedge Live podcast. My guests today are Jason Garcia, president of the Wedge, and Josh Martin, president of Documenters. Is that what you're president of?
Not accurate. I am not president of anything.
Okay. I used to say Google.
And I should say since you decided I'm the president of Documenters, I should say any comments made today are in my personal capacity and not on behalf of Minneapolis Documenters.
See, remember when we were at the Charter Commission and the new Charter Commissioner came out and asked you, where are you from? Like, she asked me where I'm from, and I said Wedge Live, and she blank stare at that because nobody recognizes what that is. And then I introduced you as Josh Martin from Google Docs. And then you said, no, I'm with Documenters. I guess you were there in your capacity as your...
time I was,
as a documenter, and that's why you said that. So you're not here in your capacity as a documenter. You're just here in your capacity with Google Docs, I think.
Sure. Yep, we'll go with that.
I am also not here in my capacity as president of the Wedge.
Okay, well, you act like bad things are going to befall you both by coming on the podcast and saying the name of things you're affiliated with. I don't think.
Yeah,
I'm a secretary of the Kingfield Neighborhood Association. But I'm not speaking on behalf of them either.
So yesterday was a big primary, and Ilhan cut it close. Don Samuels, who I thought was a poor candidate, did quite well, surprisingly well, like 2%, just above 2% margin. Jacob Fry was hooting at the Don Samuels concession speech / results party.
And if you remember the last time she won by 20 points?
20-point swing.
20-point swing is what he said compared to last time in 2020.
Yeah, and called it a wake-up call, I think, that Ilhan needed to...
be nicer to him.
Congresswoman Ilhan Omar should work together with him more and be more willing to reconcile with him, I think.
Because she endorsed his both opponents. It's something I did too. I endorsed both. But a lot of people endorsed both of his opponents, and that didn't work out very well.
Yeah,
but, Josh,
I do think it's ironic that Jacob made that statement, given that he has not won the DFL endorsement for mayor either time that he ran. So I guess maybe he thinks that is why he doesn't have to work with other people.
He does seem to have a history of having challenges working well with strong progressive women, but that's never his fault. That's always the woman's fault.
Right, especially women of color.
I think it's important. I kind of like the fact that we have a state legislative delegation that, for example, came out and said, hey, we would like a full-time bus lane. We support that. Mm-hmm. Like, if we had a bunch of state elected officials who were aligned with Fry, they'd be like, no, he's our friend. We're not sending that letter. I kind of think, like, people are leveraging crime. In other words, Samuel's in a year where violent crime isn't like a huge concern, isn't coming this close, and he's an objectively like more conservative candidate than your average Minneapolis voter would really want. If you looked at the issues, issue by issue, whether it's like school issues or calling the police on people selling hot dogs on the street, or like affiliating with a right-wing think tank. There's a lot of like troubling things about Don Samuels. He's a poor candidate who I think we're leveraging fear, as I wrote on wedgelive.com, to produce some like oddball characters, conservative characters, people with views that might be considered offensive to your average voter in a normal year. What does everyone think of that?
Yeah, I think, that's been the carryover. I think the phrase that I saw on Twitter was the Joe radicalization of Minneapolis politics. That, Joe Radinovich, having run Jacob's campaign last year for re-election and winning, really just continued to bang on those same notes of, anybody more progressive is just going to get rid of police. We have to have police to be safe. Policing is the only measure of safety in Minneapolis. Look at all this crime. And that, we saw Don Samuels last year being a key ally for Jacob as far as filing lawsuits against the city, even while hanging out with Jacob. So I think it doesn't surprise me that apparatus that has been working with those type of candidates continues to use that message, because that has been successful for them in the past, and it's sort of a lowest common denominator type of campaign to run.
I think it is hilarious that the way you show your friendship for Mayor Fry is that you sue him over his failure to provide enough police. Because one of the things that came out, I forget at what level of appeal it was, but like one of the arguments from the city was like, oh, it's the mayor's discretion to do this, and clearly it is. Like, MPD hasn't been defunded by the numbers. The mayor has just, and I understand why he has failed to fill the ranks back up. It's about more than just money, but like essentially this lawsuit is accusing the mayor of failing at his duty to fill up the ranks, and like this is the mayor's friend. And what it's really about is creating headlines, constant headlines. City fails to staff up their police department, which for one reason or another never falls on Mayor Fry as his responsibility, despite the fact it is literally his responsibility in the city charter and always has been. But Josh, I want to go to some CNN breaking news music so you can read off some election results as if this is election night, even though the episode will air two days after Election Day. I'm going to play some CNN breaking news music. We'll start with Congressional District 5. Okay, we're going now to Josh Martin at the decision desk. He's got results from Congressional District 5 where Ilhan Omar was challenged by Don Samuels, former city council candidate. Josh, do you have any results to announce?
We do have results, John. In Congressional District 5, with 100% of precincts reporting, we are calling this race for Ilhan Omar. She received 50.3% of the vote, 57,683 votes. Don Samuels received 55,217 votes, which is 48.2% of the votes.
Oh my God, that's so close. That's so close. I'm so relieved. Ooh, wow, dodged a bullet there.
Truly a razor-thin margin.
Yeah, and we already talked about it, so I guess we don't have to go back and pretend like we haven't already talked about it. Should we move on to Hennepin County Attorney? I think that's a very interesting race that not as many people are talking about. And I'm going to play the music again.
All right.
Okay, we have results in the Hennepin County, the race for Hennepin County Attorney. Our area's top prosecutor, Josh Martin at the decision desk again. Do we have results in the Hennepin County Attorney's race?
We do have results in the Hennepin County Attorney's race. 100% of precincts are reporting. The top 2 candidates will proceed to the general election. The top candidate by a wide margin, Mary Moriarty, with 62,336 votes, or 36.4% of the total votes. Second place, so getting that second spot, is Martha Holton-Dimick with 30,668 votes, or 17.9% of the votes. And Ryan Winkler, by a small margin, gets shut out of the general election with 27,924 votes, or 16.3% of the total votes. And then there were 4 other candidates who received fewer votes than that.
Yeah. Thank you for skipping over the rest of the candidates. There were a lot of candidates. So I think, let's bid a fond farewell to Ryan Winkler, who I think fell victim to never quite having a lane here, because Mary Moriarty is clearly the progressive candidate, the criminal justice reformer, the career public defender, the really smart, sharp lawyer who, people on the left enjoyed a lot. Winkler was kind of the moderate, and what stood out to me at the recent candidate forum hosted by the Downtown Council is Paul Ostro was pandering so hard. He was such a different person than he was talking to me. He was pandering very hard to the Downtown Council. Martha Holton-Dimick is just the same person every time you see her, just very incendiary and is all tough talk. And then when you look at her career as a prosecutor and a judge, it's just a disaster. So even if you're a very law and order type person, I think her record should alarm you, because everything she does seems to end not very well. And if you want people to be prosecuted and convicted of violent crimes, I don't know if she'll be able to even carry out what she says her priorities are. Winkler, on the other hand, is just kind of in there in the middle, kind of not throwing bombs like some of the others. And I don't think he ever found a constituency, really. Even though he had all the money, he's the incumbent, and he never quite started throwing bombs. So he's not a progressive. He's not like the hardcore law and order type.
John, I just want to interrupt you. He's not an incumbent for this position.
You're right.
Did I say he was an incumbent?
Yes, you did.
Really?
He is. Yes.
Why would I have said
not an incumbent.
That?
Arguably, he is running to somewhat carry on the mantle of our current incumbent.
If I said he was an incumbent,
more progressive veneer.
I did not mean to say he was an incumbent. Maybe I meant candidate instead of incumbent.
Well, I think part of the problem that he ran into is that it came out very early that he has no trial experience.
I don't think anyone cared about that. I don't think any voter gave a shit about that.
I think you're wrong. And I think that's why he came in third.
It's a valid criticism. I'm just saying nobody cared.
Oh, I understand what you're saying, and I'm saying you're wrong.
Okay.
But I do think that it is worth noting that even though Winkler did come in behind Holton-Dimick, they were relatively close. It was only 1.5 percentage points between them. And it took basically the votes combined for the two of them to equal what Mary Moriarty got.
He appeared to be running a real campaign, though, and she was running on exclusively hot air, and that appeared to push her to even just ahead of Winkler, which is surprising to me. I did not expect her to play spoiler to Winkler.
Yeah, and I mean, Tad Jude played spoiler to Paul Ostro, so well, who could have seen that coming?
That's another thing I think people don't give a shit about is Tad Jude, who is who put out a video making him appear to be Batman's police friend.
We are on a perilous and dangerous course set ablaze as the largest county in Minnesota. The people demand justice based upon facts and the law.
That was a great video, and then at the end it says Tad Jude in a very weird font. It didn't match the tone of the video. It's like a comedy font at the end.
And make crime illegal again.
I showed that video a few nights ago to some friends who had not seen it before, and it was probably the highlight of the evening. It is very entertaining. Even though Tad Jude is not in the race anymore, that video will live on in our hearts.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that will be
When
one
Josh
of
Martin
the,
throws a party, his election nerd friends are very entertained by the. We all wish we had Josh Martin's group of friends because I want to hang out with people who can appreciate a Tad Jude video.
Yeah, as far as, 2022 primary ephemera goes, that will be like the top reference for many years, I'm sure.
Josh, did any numbers, you really analyzed you compiled a spreadsheet with all these numbers of the CD5 race and the Hennepin County Attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Any numbers stand out to you?
So Don Samuels tended to do best in the southwestern suburbs and in some cases technically part of the city, but still the southwest part of the city. So areas such as the portion of Edina that is in Congressional District 5, Golden Valley, and Minneapolis Ward 13, areas like that where he saw some of his strongest performances. Conversely, Ilhan Omar's best performing areas were all in Minneapolis. Specifically, in order, we're looking at wards 9, 6, 10, 8, 2, and 1, or her areas where she was above 60%. And now that I've seen the Star Tribune's map come out recently, that tracks as well. So when you look at Minneapolis itself, Ilhan does very well, with the exception of 13 and to a lesser extent 7 and 11. And then when you start to get out into the suburbs, it starts to become more pro-Samuels territory.
I did some number crunching myself, and part of it was overlapping with things you had done hours before, so I was kicking myself over that. I looked at 13, 4, and 5, and 12 in the county attorney's race. And
Yep.
I think 12 versus 13 is an interesting dichotomy because Ilhan basically was 60-40. This is according to David Brower in 12, and it was reversed, Samuel 60-40 in 13, both in South Minneapolis, both, white, prosperous, if that's a word we can use instead of wealthy. And although 12 less so than 13, and an ideological split there. I also looked at the 2018 primary versus 2022, and turnout. Let me look at my numbers here. So there were 21,000 fewer votes in 2022. So it went from 135 to 114,000 roughly. But if you look at Ward 13, and I just spot checked a couple of precincts on this. I haven't compiled all the numbers. Looks like turnout was up in Ward 13 over 2018, primary to primary.
Interesting.
And then if you look at it, I looked at a couple of Ward 5 precincts. Turnout was down. Those 20,000 votes that it went down had to come from somewhere. Didn't come from Ward 13, which was actually up over 2018. So I think a deeper look into those numbers to see where turnout was up compared to 2018 versus where it's down would be interesting. But
Yeah. One set of numbers that I looked at, of course, is the results here in the wedge. So Ward 10, precincts 1 and 2. John, you were on the ground helping people vote in our part of the city here.
it's true. I was an election judge.
Yeah, and as was Josh. So thank you both for your service. But in the wedge, Ilhan Omar handily defeated Don Samuels. I believe in 10-1 it was about 65 to 35, and I believe in 10-2 it was about 75 to 25. So one thing that I would be interested in looking at in the future, breaking down some more data, is to see how the results play out when you compare areas with higher single-family homes versus higher multifamily homes. Because just from taking a look at some of the wards around the city, it seems like a lot of the renters tend to favor Ilhan Omar, almost like with question 3 on the ballot last year in the election.
And if you look at the sheer number of voters, I don't know what the raw totals are, but Minneapolis wards are roughly equivalent in population. And Ward 13, Josh, you have to like step in and tell me where I'm wrong, but like doubling or tripling the number of total votes produced, is that true about Ward 13 compared to some other wards?
Let's see. Ward 13, 10,566. And then Ward 6, for instance, in comparison, 2907. So yeah, you're tripling the number of votes compared to some other wards.
So more than the margins, even the percentage margins. It's just like the sheer number of votes that Ward 13 and Ward 12, which is voting a different way than Ward 13, they produce a lot of votes compared to places with equivalent population where people just aren't turning out at the rates that they are in South Minneapolis and Southwest.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily against any sort of trend. When I lived in Ward 5 in the Harrison neighborhood, I definitely saw a big difference in voter engagement and attendance at caucuses and things like that compared to living in Ward 8 or Ward 10.
Yeah. Although, when I looked at 2018 versus 2022 primary, it is trending in a different direction when you look at Ward 5, for example, and that may carry over to other parts of North Minneapolis too, where it's going down even further in one place and up even more in Ward 13.
Yeah, and I think, if you look at where you were more likely to see a lot of campaigning, particularly on the Samuels side, it felt like they were very heavily engaging in Ward 13, Ward 7, and out into St. Louis Park, Edina, and those areas, as opposed to focusing on the city itself.
So can we draw any conclusions? So Martha Holton-Dimick and Don Samuels both running as like, this is what North Minneapolis wants. Like, we're from North Minneapolis. We represent those viewpoints. But if you look at the margins, as David Brower pointed out in his thread on some of the stats, like Ilhan won, her margin was down in North Minneapolis. She still won North Minneapolis. Right. And Don Samuels really ran up his margin in Ward 13 quite heavily, and in some of the southwestern suburbs. So does it put the lie to that claim? Like, Martha Holton-Dimick did not do very well in North Minneapolis as compared to some of her other precincts, and Mary Moriarty won by significant margins everywhere, basically, though she did not have a 50% plus margin.
No, but Mary Moriarty had pretty much double the votes of Martha Holton-Dimick. So I think that's looking at the data that Josh had put out earlier, I do think that it shows very clearly that those were not candidates who were, they may live on the north side, but they were not representing north side voters no matter what they say. And certainly that was kind of the thrust of Don's comments during his concession speech, where the DFL as a whole is out of touch with what voters want and things like that, which is a really easy thing to say when you've lost an election. That, you, of course, represent the true Minneapolis, going back to last year in the All of Minneapolis pack and things like that. It's a very common trope when you're running a conservative campaign is to claim that you represent, the will of the real people, not the overtly liberal people. And that goes back to Nixon and the silent majority.
Oh, well, Samuel's speech is a cautionary tale in saying, like, well, if we had held the election under this specific circumstance, I would have won. And it was much different than saying, like, if we had had an election with many, many more voters. What he was saying is, I would like it to have been held this year in a low turnout year. And I'm not quoting, this is just essentially what he was saying. But in the general election with more Republicans, and then we would have won. I was watching Fox 9, and the analysts after his speech were like, he really benefited from this low turnout year, and the people who are recruiting candidates against Ilhan really have to reproduce this magic of, like, candidate that is well known, extremely low turnout year. This is like the perfect storm here. Jason, you mentioned the silent majority. One of the phrases that Samuels used was the exhausted majority. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Like a new spin on the silent majority.
And to come this close means that we have our finger on the pulse of the exhausted majority.
What is the history of silent majority? Can you explain that, Jason? Where does that phrase go back to?
That goes back to Richard Nixon.
As he went to work on a speech to respond to the protests. Insisting on writing it himself, he distinguished his supporters, the forgotten Americans, from the vocal minority in the streets with a new catchphrase.
To you, the great silent majority.
And it is used to imply that, there is this subset of America, now it's sort of morphed into being referred to as working class Americans, who are this sort of semi-mythological group of voters that can be malleable enough to be used as support for just about any type of policy or feeling that you want to promote in your campaign. But it tends to be invoked primarily by very conservative Republican candidates. And of course, looking at the campaign that Jacob Fry ran last year, which was, as you said earlier, a very heavily fear-based and motivated campaign, that's typically something you'll see from the right. And it is something that Joe Radinovich has used multiple times now. I think maybe because it was used against him when he was running for Congress the second time. And it's something that he has found easy to latch on to. And, one of the things about trying to recreate this magic is it's been pointed out that they were able to run a black man with very good name recognition throughout Minneapolis, somebody who had been on city council and held other elected positions in Minneapolis, but is able to use his identity to deflect from his very conservative political stances. You don't hear very many progressives saying we should burn down North High School, or you don't hear very many progressives saying that they ran out of their house in their underwear to try to chase down somebody who had taken change out of their car.
Or running against the DFL. Like, Ilhan got some criticism for criticizing Obama. From the left, she criticized Obama. And Samuels has a history of, criticizing Democrats. He did it in his speech last night. A DFL that's out of touch with voters. So nearly elected a guy who would have been criticizing Democrats in Congressional District 5 from the right.
And I think it goes to show that this is sort of the play that the Jacob Fry wing of the DFL has been moving toward, is criticizing anybody who is more progressive than them while claiming to be the true progressives themselves. They've set up sort of this Vichy DFL that has been funded largely by Jacob Fry's developer friends, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars from people like Kelly Doran.
Jason, I have to interrupt you because we have more results coming in.
Oh.
So I'm hearing from our election desk that the results in Hennepin County Sheriff race are coming in. Josh, do you have results?
Yes, for Hennepin County Sheriff, the top two candidates will proceed to the general election. The top candidate by a wide margin, Joanna Witt, with 91,001 votes, or 57% of the total votes. The second candidate, Joseph Banks, with 35,832 votes, or 22.5% of the total votes, edges out Jai Hansen, who comes in third with 32,690 votes, or 20.5% of the total votes.
And Josh, is Joseph Banks related to the menswear store Joseph A. Banks? I feel like that's why he edged out Jai Hansen, because he's got a name. He's got the name recognition of the suit store. What do you think about that, Josh? You're the election nerd.
No relation to the best of my knowledge. I haven't explored the bump that one gets from Jose Banks name parallel. That result was somewhat surprising to me. This is probably the biggest mea culpa of my predictions. I recently confidently told people there was no chance Joseph Banks would advance to the general. He hadn't run much of a campaign that I could see. And the conventional wisdom, including from myself, was that it was definitely going to be Witt and Hansen advancing to the general. So this result was a surprise.
I'll tell you what it is. And I teased Tom Olson, the park board commissioner, that none of his campaign mattered at all. It's because his name is Tom Olson, and it reassured enough people. Like, this is just the blandest white guy you have ever met. He's totally safe. Elect him, Tom Olson with an E. And Joseph Banks, also, like a very standard issue name, Joseph versus Jai. So Joanna Witt, I think, is the one DFL endorsed candidate, and anyone who wanted that voted for her, I think. And then Jai Hansen, it made people nervous. Jai, that name just made people nervous. And Joseph is the solid name that, like, Republican or conservative-leaning voters was like, I'm going with Joseph, not Jai. Jai Hansen sounds like somebody you'd meet at a protest. A Jai? I think that's what it is.
Sure. So some voters were not aware that Joseph Banks is also a black candidate, is what you're suggesting?
Yeah, and not all that progressive from what I could tell. He was not like Joseph Banks was running as a progressive or anything. But
I mean, they're all running for sheriff, so there's like a limit to the progressivism that you'll see from them.
Yeah, Joanna Witt has all her yard signs in like Tom Hoke yards. These are what I call Tom Hoke yards because that's how I relate to the world. If I've seen a Tom Hoke sign in your yard, it's forever etched in my mind. This is a questionable character, and I question anyone else they support. Any further yard signs that go up in those yards, I'm like, I don't know about this person.
Well, as far as yard signs go, I do think it's worth pointing out that of the signs in former city council person Meg Tuthill's yard, 2 of 3 were soundly defeated within the wedge itself. And
I love this segment. Hold on, Jason. Before you go too hard, I'm going to play the CNN breaking news music, and we're going to have results from Meg Tuthill's yard. Okay? Okay, I'm getting word that we have more results, this time from Meg Tuthill's yard. We're going to correspondent Jason Garcia. Jason, do we have results from the candidates who appeared in Meg Tuthill's yard?
Yes, John, it's been a shocking turn of events here in the wedge. That the lawn signs represented in Meg Tuthill's yard being Don Samuels, Martha Holton-Dimick, and Joanna Witt suffered a 2/3 defeat. So we'll have to see what happens with those lawn signs, if they're banished to the Hall of Shame that is former lawn signs in Meg Tuthill's yard, or if they will continue to ride out this messaging by claiming victory with Dawana Witt.
Wow, that's a pretty devastating series of results for Meg Tuthill's yard. Thank you for that, Jason.
Yeah, and I think that it, again, kind of shows who is out of touch with their neighbors and their neighborhood, as opposed to, claiming that Ilhan Omar is out of touch with, voters in CD5.
No, you're out of touch, Jason. We're having an out of touch contest. Who's out of touch? I don't know.
Oh, you're definitely the most out of touch. Josh is by far the most in touch. You call yourself Wedge Live, and you're most well known for visiting a store that's in Whittier.
Which store? Oh, Aldi, yeah.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's completely out of touch with the Wedge.
Okay, I'll own that. Maybe we can talk about Mayor Fry. People are saying, like, oh, this is about Mayor Fry challenging her in 2024. I don't think Mayor Fry wants any piece of Ilhan in 2024 with more voters voting. I think if any, and why would he leave his job as mayor early? I think the year to watch is maybe 2026. They'll recruit another garbage candidate, and the risk there is maybe they recruit a candidate who beats her in 24, and then Fry doesn't have the opportunity to jump in. But...
well, I think maybe that's why they recruited Don, is that if he had won, he could have retired, as an elderly person often might, to sort of pave the way for a Fry run.
Because I don't know what Jacob Fry does next. Other than this. Other than CD5. It's like the only place he could ever run for anything.
Well, and I'm not even sure that is really a good pathway for him.
What pathway do you see for him?
I don't know there is any good pathway for him.
It's the only pathway. It's not a great pathway, but it is the only pathway.
There's that, but I think Fry's ambitions are larger than that, and that may cloud his vision somewhat. I could see him trying to run for U.S. Senate at some point
in Minnesota.
In Minnesota.
Oh. How
not
does
saying
that
it'll
not
be
end
I'm not saying it'll go well. I'm not saying it'll go well for him, but I could see him doing it.
You may have lots of rich friends from the Chamber of Commerce here in the Twin Cities. You can run for Senate as the guy from Minneapolis. He's still the guy from Minneapolis.
Both of our current senators are in Minneapolis.
Yeah, the other thing
I don't know if a Minneapolis mayor makes that jump.
The other thing is that if he is reactionary enough over the next few years and can say, look at what I did to put more police on the streets in Minneapolis, look at how much more I've done to promote the office of the chief of police to, even greater power in the city and things like that, that may be a message that he could try to play to outstate Minnesota. But again, then we're getting into that Norm Coleman territory of shifting from Democrat to Republican kind of blatantly.
Yeah. A lot of people hit him as like, oh, he's this guy from the East Coast. And this isn't Minneapolis politics. And it irritates me because I'm not from Minneapolis. And I don't particularly care for just criticizing someone because they're not from here, because I'm not from here. And so he gets that a lot in Minneapolis. I don't know how effective it will be, but it will be more effective, his East Coast roots, if he tries to run for Senate in Minnesota. In addition to just being the guy associated with, imagine the Batman video they would make about Minneapolis if Jacob Fry ran for Senate in Minnesota. It would put the Tad Jude video to shame. In fact, just reuse the Tad Jude video against Jacob Fry whenever he decides to run.
I think his hope is that he'll try to make some sort of turnaround with Cedric Alexander and some of the other changes he's making in public safety departments, or at least enough of one that some of the traditional media, such as the Star Tribune, will and their editorial board will go along with that narrative. regardless of how much truth there is to it or not. That might work. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Here's
in the
what
next
I
few
say.
years.
I hope things get so good in Minneapolis that Jacob Fry is suddenly able to brag to the rest of Minnesota, hey, look at the turnaround project I engineered here in Minneapolis, because I live here, and I would hope things get so great that Jacob Fry can coast on it for the rest of his life, and he won't always be known as the disaster mayor. But we'll see.
You know, his strategy over the past, well, he and his coterie of hangers-on has been so negative about how Minneapolis is falling apart and needs kind of a lone tough guy to help resolve things, that I don't know how he could ever shift and make a different message at this point from that.
I hope he runs a Senate campaign against the Minneapolis City Council. I hope he just uses that tactic.
I mean,
I would have done so good if it hadn't been for those council members.
For those meddling council members.
Are there any races we need results from? Because I kind of like playing the breaking news music. Do we have more results that we'd like to give?
Let's see. Other races in Minneapolis that were moderately interesting.
Should I play the
guess
breaking
we're,
news music? Should I jump in with the breaking news music?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. And we're going to Josh Martin with yet more results from races you didn't care all that much about, but still happened. Josh.
Sure, so we're getting results from some of the state legislative races in Minneapolis. State Senate District 62, incumbent Omar Fatah wins his primary with 7,416 votes, or 60.7% of the vote, defeating challenger Sean Layden with 4,811 votes, or 39.3% of the vote. Also in District 62, we have House District 62A, where incumbent State Representative Aisha Gomez, who had been redistricted from 62B, wins with 4,167 votes, or 69.4% of the vote, defeating challenger Osman Ahmed with 1,834 votes, or 30.6% of the vote.
Okay. Yeah, more results.
Interesting connection between the Don Samuels campaign and the Osman Ahmed campaign is that they share a campaign treasurer. So I think that could serve as another blow against that wing of the Vichy DFL, as I've taken to calling it, to show, you know, that they have sort of started to pick their own candidates to try to run against popular progressive representatives, and they didn't seem to have a whole lot of success.
Jason Garcia is your dad who watches too much History Channel, I think, with that reference. The Vichy DFL. Come on. I'm not going to ask you to explain what the Vichy reference. You'll
That's
just go on
fine.
Forever and ever about
Josh can explain it.
World War II documentaries you've been watching. Do we want to tell election judge stories? Jason, you're not an election judge, are you?
No, but I would love to hear your election judge stories.
Am I allowed, Josh? Am I allowed to tell election judge stories?
I'm not in charge of that.
I think as long as you don't identify any voters.
I'm not going to identify anyone. I won't. 99.9% of voters are incredibly gracious and appreciative. That's my election judge story. So there was one person who found out that their polling place had changed, and that's an incredibly common thing this year. Like, your polling place changed, not only because of map redrawing, but in the wedge in particular. Like, they shifted the boundaries and put a lot more voters in 10-1 and then changed the location because there's more floor space to accommodate them. I'm not sure what the motivation of that was. It may have been because the South Wedge is growing at a more rapid pace. So they wanted to, like, build a map that could accommodate future growth, maybe. so they'll be more evenly spaced. But that's a long way of me saying there was somebody who got turned away and told to go downstairs. And as the person was leaving, and I didn't know this person, they turned to me and said, "I'm glad I'm not voting where you are." And like apparently they'd recognized me and had bad feelings about me. And so my cool points with the other election judge went up. Well, election judges went up immediately. It was like, how are you so cool that someone is that mad at you? And then one asked, "Are you an elected official?" So they all think I'm a celebrity now because somebody hated me that much to say a mean thing to me as they went away. That's my election judge story. Josh, do you have any election judge stories?
Redistricting was certainly an issue where I was serving as well. So I was in one of the 3 combined polling places where we had 2 precincts as a single polling place. Voters would come into the registration table, and then we kind of split them off from there to get their correct ballot and go to the correct tabulator. So that was precincts 10-7 and 10-8, which is a good chunk of Whittier. However, Whittier was affected in redistricting because when they tried to change the boundaries of Park District 3, so a slice of Whittier that used to vote at this polling place got split off into a new polling place. So we did have some voters who were like, "Oh, you're actually at that place now. You need to go over to this building instead to vote."
The good thing about the wedge situation is both precincts are still in the same building. So even when somebody finds out they're in the wrong place, it just means you're in the wrong room and you have to go down some stairs. So that's not too bad.
Yep.
Also, people have some people have very deep connections to having always voted in that place for as long as they can remember. And when you tell them you don't vote here anymore, they get very sad. And I think that's remarkable. People get an attachment to the room they have always voted in. Like, you can come back to that room if you want and visit it every time you come to vote, if you want. And just then go down the hall and vote where you really vote. So that's another thing that happens. I have always voted here.
Yeah, the wheel of progress. It stops for no one, unfortunately.
Have we reacted hard enough to these election results? Is there anything else that we need to react to in this reaction episode?
Do you want to talk about school board?
Sure. Okay, I'm getting word that we have more results from the election desk with Josh Martin, who's going to take a look at the school board results. Josh, take it away.
So, with Minneapolis School Board, for the at-large race, since there are 2 seats up for election this year, the top 4 candidates will proceed to the general election. And we have Carrie Jo Felder with 30,593 votes, or 31.3% of the vote. Colin Beachy with 25,199 votes, or 25.7% of the vote. Sonia Emmerich with 18,464 votes, or 18.9% of the vote. And then 4th, Lisa Skefty with 9,013 votes, or 9.2% of the votes. Barely beating out Jayton White for the 4th seat with 8,901 votes, or 9.1% of the vote. Meanwhile, in the District 5 race for school board, the top 2 candidates will proceed to the general election. First is Lori Norvell with 8,715 votes, or 58% of the vote. And second is Laurel Myra with 2,834 votes, or 18.9% of the vote.
Okay. Thank you for that, Josh.
I think with those numbers, it's definitely worth noting that in the at-large race, the 2 highest vote-getting candidates were endorsed by MFT, the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, or the Teachers Union, Educators Union, as well as Lori Norvell. She was also their endorsed candidate. The 3 of them sort of have been running as a unified ticket. They've done a lot of things together, tried doing a lot of messaging to show, that would be taking a position or taking several positions on the board to try to advance a unified goal.
So how many candidates advance in the at-large race again?
4 candidates advance in the at-large race.
Okay. So that would be Carrie Jo Felder, Sonia Emmerich, Colin Beachy, and then who's the other one?
Lisa Skefty.
Lisa Skefty.
Okay.
Although, because that one was so close, we might want to keep an eye on whether there's a recount, because there was a very small margin for that 4th seat. But assuming these results hold, that will be the 4.
And then Norvell got 58% of the vote in District 5, which means she's probably going to win in the general election. Probably.
Yeah. Lori Norvell seems to be a pretty dominant candidate in District 5. Yep.
Yeah, I think especially coming out of the educators' strike earlier this year, there were some questions about how candidates who were backed by the educators' union would be perceived. And I think this shows that there's still, the educators' strike was very well received by a lot of the population of the city. And I think this kind of shows that there's still broad sympathy for educators in Minneapolis, and that people want to see some changes made in regards to how educators are treated and what sort of voice they have in overall school board policy going forward.
Can I play the role of the skeptic here, Jason? Remember when you said people cared that Ryan Winkler didn't have courtroom experience? Remember when you said that?
Yeah.
I feel like people didn't really pay it. People don't care about the school board very much.
Oh, that's where you're wrong.
I mean, there are a group of people who care very much about the school board. I think most people, that's
good
the last
clarification.
That is the last thing on their mind, right? There are a lot of parents and teachers who are super into school board politics. I think a lot of people are getting to that part of the ballot and they're like, well, I've heard of this person and I'm voting for them. I don't know how deeply we're thinking about these issues.
I think that especially with the strike having just happened, there has been a lot more eyes on that sort of thing. But also, when you think about the school board, you're right that there are certainly segments of the population who are maybe unmarried or don't have kids or things like that who look past it. But I think for broad swaths of the city, the school board sits at the intersection of their children and their tax dollars. And those are very important things to a lot of people.
It is undoubtedly a very important thing that Minneapolis have good schools. You care about a healthy city, schools are an essential part of that. But, yeah. I don't know that it gets the attention that it warrants. And therefore, I don't know, people got a lot of things going on. I have a lot of things going on. I don't even have kids. And what?
Yeah, I think that may change what you perceive.
What's that?
I think that's part of what changes how you perceive the school board, is that you don't have kids. You don't have a material interest in those races.
Well, again, I'm not saying it's not vitally important.
Right. I'm just saying that colors your perception of that people not caring, is because you have less of a reason to care.
I will grant you that there are people who care very deeply. I just don't think it's not getting the attention that a lot of the other things get. It's the last thing on the ballot for a lot of people. No? Well, I live in the wedge. There are a lot of childless losers here in the wedge like me who can't be bothered to research the school board.
No.
That's why I tell people to read Naomi Kritzer's blog for candidate write-ups. Very helpful.
Yeah. I no longer have a child. My offspring is a full adult, so... And
really?
They voted in this primary, in fact.
So your child stops being your child when they become an adult? Is that how that works?
I mean, you could make the argument that I will always have a child as defined as offspring, but they are no longer a child. They can vote for themselves and do all of their things, like, help you at Aldi in Whittier.
Yeah, I was questioning whether I could tell this story. I ran into Jason's Jacob. That's how I refer to him, as Jason's Jacob at Aldi, where he now works. Apparently isn't that enthusiastic about the job. I asked Jacob, how do you feel about your new job here at Aldi? And he immediately was like, not really that into it, or something to that effect. But then caught himself and realized, in front of coworkers, you must say, this is great. This is the best job.
Yep. And I heard that you came in right before close and demanded some sort of celebrity treatment, and insisted that people wait to check out for you to go first and things like that.
Some guy liked my hat, though. I was wearing my Lindale hat. He's like, that is a cool hat. I want a hat like that.
Which hat are you wearing now, by the way?
Bryant.
All right.
Bryant Avenue. And then he kept doing this. He like some kind of animal, doing an aggressive gesture, and 30 seconds into it, after he'd done it dozens of times, he's like, turn your hat down so I can see it. After he'd been nodding his head at me. So it was a very weird interaction, but at least he liked my hat.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've run out of things to talk about now that we're talking about Aldi checkout experiences. Anyone have any closing thoughts? Josh, let's go to you. Closing thoughts.
So I think overall, if you're someone who identifies as progressive, this was a fairly good election. On the other hand, there's also some warning signs, and I'm referring mainly to the Omar Samuels race there. We can't get complacent. We need to make sure we continue to organize and continue to work on future elections, certainly 2024, but also 2023 with the council elections coming up. So that's something for us all to keep in mind as more elections come up.
Jason.
I definitely echo Josh's sentiments. Josh is a well-known thought leader in Minneapolis, so I appreciate those insights. One of the things that I would say is it felt like a very weird campaign for Ilhan Omar, and that it seemed like for long stretches her campaign just sort of ignored Don Samuels, didn't do a lot of campaigning, certainly didn't send the volume of mailers, or did no TV advertising, while Don Samuels' friends created a whole special PAC to do that and things. So I think it's easy to overreact to the closeness of this, but I think there are also some things to look at and say, well, if Ilhan had dipped into her campaign funds more and done more of these things, it certainly could have changed the tenor of the race.
Yeah, before the election, I wrote a thing about how people don't vote your fears. We made a lot of factual and mistakes in 21. People believed a lot of wrong things, and it guided their vote because we're voting our fears. I think Mary Moriarty, having come out with the more votes than any other candidate in the Hennepin County Attorney's race, is maybe a good sign. I think that's somebody who is very factual and is grounded in reality and not scaring people, and I am hopeful about that. I think the Don Samuels closeness in the Ilhan Omar victory is a warning, as Josh says, people voting their fears. I don't know if there are any grand conclusions to draw, but I think we're still at risk in 2023 of having a result driven by people voting their fears. So that's what I'm concerned about moving forward. There's reason for optimism, but also reason for being afraid of people who are very afraid. That's how I would put it.
Well said, John.
Okay. Thank you both for joining me. Jason Garcia,
thank you.
Josh Martin. I'm your host, John Edwards. This has been the Wedge Live Podcast. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've going on today?
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now, 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 right now.